you know the story of Samson, even if you don't know the story of Samson, the picture is a little scary. What am I trying to do this morning? Well, I'm trying to take an R-rated Bible story and make it a G-rated sermon. Now, if you've been following the readings, we've been putting the readings in the bulletin each week so you can kind of catch up on the story and know where it's going. I invite you to grab the insert that gives you a little bit of an outline of where I'm going, because we're going to kind of stick to that fairly closely as we work through a synopsis of the story of Samson. Now, Samson's story starts out really good. Samson has an incredible birth experience. Well, his mother has an incredible birth experience. His mother is unable to have children. She gets a visitation from an angel in Judges chapter 13 around page 199 in your brown Bibles. If you've got one of the Living Hope brown Bibles, page 199 is where the story of Samson starts. And Manoah and his wife is never named, she is unable to have children. And she gets a visitation from an angel, and the angel tells her she is going to have a child, and this child is going to be great. In fact, this child is going to deliver. Doesn't sound like much to us in 21st century, the word deliver. You might think a delivery guy, but in that day and age, the word deliver is the word that we would use as savior. Samson is going to begin to save his people from the Philistines. This lady who has been unable to have children is told she's going to have a child. Not only is she going to have a child, this child is going to begin to save Israel from the Philistines, who have kind of conquered them and whom the Israelites have sort of just melted into the whole area. You'll recognize some place names even with current problems that are happening in Israel and Palestine. In fact, technically the words Philistine and Palestine are related, and over the years, the word Palestine comes from the word that we use for Philistine. So there's a lot of connections, again, not just the news that's happening in Cairo, but news that is constantly in front of us in terms of the story of Samson. So she is told that she is going to have a child, and this child is going to do an incredible thing that hasn't been happening for a long time. He is going to begin not just to manage things and be a judge in Israel, he is going to move them forward into freedom from the bondage they are to the Philistines. And the Philistines were a nasty, nasty group of people. They had technology beyond the other people around them. Those of you that play the video games, and the opposing side always has maybe better technology, better instrumentation, better ways to get you when you're not ready. Well, that's kind of how it was for the Philistines and the Israelites. The Philistines were always ahead of them in the game, and for that reason, the Israelites had sort of come under the umbrella and the authority of the Philistines. Not only is Samson's mother told she's going to have a baby, she's also told that he's going to be special in his dedication to God. He is going to be a Nazirite. Now, typically in the Jewish culture, a Nazirite was sort of a voluntary position. Someone would say, I want to dedicate myself to God for X amount of time. Samson's a little different because he is dedicated to God before he's even born, while he's in his mother's womb. In fact, the instructions about what Samson is to do as a Nazirite, and there's certain rules. If you're going to dedicate yourself to God, there are certain things you have to do to show the world that you've dedicated yourself to God for a period of time. In this case, Samson, it's his whole life. One of those things that Samson is to do as a Nazirite, he is not to touch a carcass. He is not to be around a corpse, because that was something unclean for the Israelites under Old Testament law. To be around a dead person, you had to do certain rituals and ceremonies at the temple to cleanse yourself, and certain sacrifices. You are not to eat raisins or grapes or drink wine, among other things. So this was the vow, and in fact, when Samson's mother is told about the vow, she's supposed to do those things even before he's born. So it's that kind of preparatory thing in her life. She is to observe these things. He's born as a Nazirite, and he's going to be a Nazirite until he dies. So it's pretty significant. It's pretty special. Hard to kind of maybe get our head around these restrictions a little bit. So I'm going to ask the kids here to come and join me at the front, and you can kind of just sit in the front seats for the moment here. Come on up front, kids. We got some things at the front here we got to try. Now, Samson was told he couldn't eat raisins. We have raisins on this table. And Samson was told he couldn't eat grapes. And we have grapes on this table. So come on up to the front. Get a good eye view. You can sit over on this side too. In a minute, we'll go sit on the steps. But for now, you can sit in these front rows. Okay, now I want you to think. If you had a choice, you have a choice between raisins. There's a spot over there, Josh, right there. Oh. Good. Can you guys sit together? Oh. You guys share one? That's good. That's good. There you go. Excellent. Thanks. Thanks, Pierce. Now, you have a choice. You got grapes, and you got raisins, okay? I love raisins. I love raisins. I had raisins in my oatmeal for breakfast this morning. I love raisin pie. My mom used to make something called raisin squares, which is just like raisin pie, only it's square. But anyway, I loved raisin pie. I love raisin squares. I love buttered tarts with raisins. Most of my family likes buttered tarts without raisins. I just don't get it. So I love raisins. Grapes, raisins? I'm going to choose raisins. Now, what would you guys pick? Grapes or raisins? Go to the table where the thing you prefer is located. Go to the table which you prefer. Good, I have a raisin lover. Awesome. Oh yeah, I like Raisin Bran too. Got some raisin lovers? Awesome, good. Well, we're kind of outnumbered. Looks like more people went for the grapes. Now, you'll get these in a minute. Don't worry about it. Oh, you guys didn't come for the Spider-Man stuff, did you? Oh, that's not supposed to be here. Sorry, that was... You still like raisins? Still okay with raisins? Okay. Okay, good. Just checking. Just checking. So Samson was told, here's the rules. You can't eat raisins. You can't eat grapes. You can't drink wine. You can't be around dead bodies. Do you know the story of Samson? How many of you know the story of Samson? What kind of animal did he kill? Do you remember? He killed a lion. And a couple days later, he came by the same place where he killed the lion. And do you remember what was growing in the lion? You know what was happening in the lion? There was a beehive. There was honey being cultivated by the bees in the lion, in the dead body. Well, Samson says, ha, that looks great. I want that. He just reaches in and he grabs the honey and he has some himself and he takes it to mom and dad. As he was walking, he goes back to them and says, here, I found this. He didn't tell them that it was in a carcass because it was not only bad for him, it was bad for every Israelite. Okay, so when it comes to things Samson really likes, if he wants it, he just goes and gets it. We just sang a song that talks about when temptation comes my way. Samson didn't care. If he liked it, if he wanted it, get it for me. Now, we're not living in the time and age when Samson lived. Have any of you taken a vow to be a Nazirite? Anybody vowed to be a Nazirite? No? Okay, so you guys take a dish of grapes and go back to your seat for a minute. You guys can take a box of raisins and go back and sit with you guys go sit with mom and dad, and I'll have you back up a little later. But let's get everybody at least one box of raisins. There we go. That's good. That was a nice grab. That's just like Samson. I want that. Mine, 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 mine. I was playing catch with the kids this week, and it's just reminded me of, that's mine, that's mine. I want that, I want that. That's very much how Samson functioned. It's mine. This is what I want. In fact, in your outline there, it talks about some of the dark nights. The middle part of Samson's story, after his birth, which starts out so good, things kind of go downhill. In fact, if you read the story, and I encourage you to read the story, the author is always, Samson went down to. Samson leaves his home and goes down to. In fact, there's not only the geographical progression downward towards the coastline, but there's a moral progression downward for Samson. It's just no restraint. No restraint. I want that. In fact, when it came to a bride, he sees a Philistine woman and he says to mom and dad, get her for me. I want that. I want her. And his dad kind of says, well, you know, she's not a Jewish girl. And there were limitations for the Israelites from God in terms of intermingling with the Canaanites. There were restrictions that God had put on them. And his dad, Manoah, says, you sure there's not somebody else? He says, no, I want her. Get her for me. That's the kind of person. I was going to have the kids up here kind of do this sort of, what's it like to have a brother or sister who just grabs what they want when it's something you want? But I wasn't sure what kind of mess we get into up here, and so I've kind of tried to pick food that isn't too messy in case we haven't. But just imagine what that would happen. 7 or 8 kids around the table here, 10 to 12 kids around, and just say, go for what you want. Because that's kind of how Samson lives. And he doesn't care. He really doesn't care. But in Judges chapter 14, verse 4, even though Samson starts out this way, even though he starts out, this is what I want, get her for me, even though she's a Philistine bride and not an Israelite bride, there's an interesting comment that the author makes in the story. Judges chapter 14, verse 4. No one else knew this, but the Lord is working behind the scenes. The Lord is working behind the scenes to disturb, to disrupt, to turn the tables on the Philistine empire that ruled Israel in that day. Nobody knew that. But God was at work in very surprising ways. Because here's Samson. And as I said, his life is just going down and down and down. In chapter 14, he sees the woman, he wants to marry her, there's some back and forth, and the town wasn't very far away from his hometown. It was right on the border of Israel and the Philistine territory, technically, although they intermingled and they overlapped and all that kind of stuff, just a couple miles away. And so they're back and forth between the houses, setting up the wedding. Samson asks something of his father, and then he goes and does it himself. Shouldn't surprise us. He is just so self-absorbed, so selfish in everything he does. It's all about him. And so one of these times when he's going back and forth, the local Philistines are getting a little worried about this. Now, whether it was the idea of the dead lion had got out, that this guy had killed a lion with his bare hands, whatever it was, there's a fair bit of tension, and they're trying to figure out, do we want this guy? The Philistines are trying to figure out, do we want this guy marrying one of our girls? And so that's where some of the riddles come into play, because Samson tells the riddle about the dead carcass and the honey, and they don't get it because they don't know the rest of the story. They don't know the backstory that's behind it. And they get very upset, and there's threats, and they're talking about burning his wife's house and everybody in it. I make a comment in there that Samson era is not the same as our era. No respect for human life. Might is right. President Obama defined and described ISIS as unrestrained brutality this past week. That's what life was like in the era of the judges. Unrestrained brutality. Whoever had the power was in charge. And for the Philistines, they're just going to burn people. Sound familiar? They're just going to burn people. And so that's the threat. They can't get the riddle. Samson goes to the city of Ashkelon on the Mediterranean Sea, about a marathon distance away. He kills some Philistines, brings back the clothing, and gives it to the wedding party based on their answer to the riddle. So now the Philistines in a little broader area are getting a little madder at this guy. Like, this guy is trouble. This guy is not a good person to have around. But he never did get his bride. And in chapter 15, he goes back and he tries again. This time the father had already given her to the best man. So it's like, you can't have her. Well, Samson gets rather upset. Furious would probably be a good word to use. And so because they had threatened to burn her family, he then burns a good share of their crops. And finally, in chapter 16, again, Samson just more and more, I want that, I want her, get her for me, she's mine. And then he ends up in the house of Delilah. In fact, it's interesting in the story, it's actually this lady he really loves. Not just he wants her, he really seems to love her, but she's using him. The tables are sort of turned. Up till now, women are just what he wants. Now, he loves her, but she's using him, and in fact, she's going to get pretty rich according to using it. I love how in the artwork on the front, we got this UPC code that says shekels. Delilah is going to get 150 pounds of silver, 1,100 shekels of silver from the 5 Philistine rulers. So that's 150 pounds of silver, 60 kilos of silver. That's a good take. And she's in it, it seems, for the money. All in all, you know how the story of Samson goes. He cuts his hair. He didn't look like this anymore, and his strength was gone. Little did Samson know, the Bible says, that when his hair was cut, the Spirit of God had left him. But up until that time, it seems like there's this steady progression downhill for Samson. There are a couple significant moments in Samson's life. In your outline there, we talk about Jawbone Hill. After his defeat of the Philistines who had come to attack him, the Spirit of God had come upon him, and he defeated the Philistines who had come upon him. He retreats to a hillside, a craggy hillside, and he sort of hides himself in what looks like a jawbone. It's kind of the shape of a jawbone. And it still is today, and it's identifiable. And he gets there, and it's interesting. He just says, I'm going to die of thirst. He's beaten the Philistines. He's defeated the Philistines. He's won the battle, but he can't go any farther. I'm done. It's over. And Samson says, I'm going to die of thirst. And God provides him with water and sustains him. The other great moment for Samson comes at the end of his life. When he's been captured by the Philistines. They've cut his hair, they've captured him, they've taken control of him, they've gouged out his eyes, they put him in the mill grinding grain, which is one of the lowest roles in society. It's the job of slaves. It's the job that women did. Sorry, that's how it went in that era. It's not our era, it's Samson's era. He was grinding grain in the mill. So again, he's got about as low as he can possibly get in society and even in his own eyes. And in chapter 16, he says to the Lord, he cries out and says, remember me just one more time. The two great moments of Samson, before he was born is one, but now two during his life are not when Samson was at his strongest. We think of Samson and his power and his might. Samson's greatest moments, I think, were these two occasions when he cried out to God and said, I'm going to die of thirst. And he cried out to God at the end of his life and said, remember me this one more time. It's an amazing picture of God's mercy. As we have communion this morning, we remember God's mercy. Jesus died for me. He died for my sins. He died for my disobedience. He died for my selfishness. He didn't deserve to die. I don't deserve his gift of life. So Samson is in many ways, because God answered his prayer, an incredible act of God's mercy. Not only that, please realize this whole story that God's at work behind the scenes trying to disrupt, to turn the tables on the Philistines. As far as we know, the Israelites weren't asking for help. They had so condescended to life as it was under the Philistines. They just, seems like, unlike other places in the book of Judges, nobody's asking God for help. I don't know about you, but it's kind of good to know that God's at work even when I'm not asking for help. See, the Jewish people, when Samson in one of these exploits was about to go and get the Philistines, the men of Judah, the tribe of Judah, come to Samson, 3,000 of them, show up wherever he's staying, and say, hey, we like the way it is. Please don't get too upset with these Philistines. And there's a whole thread here of the Israelites just kind of say, hey, it's status quo. Don't rock the boat. Don't get these guys mad at us, because we kind of, we don't want to get burned. The great moments for Samson are the times when he was at his best when he had nothing whatsoever to give and depended on God. And so in the back of all this, the Spirit of God is at work. There's the lion incident, and it says there in the notes, the lion incident, the clothing incident. I missed the incident in chapter 15, verse 14, when the Philistines rush on him. The Spirit of God gives him power to defeat them. And then finally it comes down to, after his hair is cut, Samson tries to fight, but he did not know the Lord had left him. So what do we do with the story of Samson? Well, I've got a note there from Hebrews chapter 11. If you want to get into Samson in any way, shape, or form and read the story, it'll challenge your understanding of how God works. It really will. The more I studied Samson, the less I liked the guy. Seriously. The more I got into the story, I'm going, what in the world? How is God using this guy? But Hebrews 11, who has a much better perspective on things than I do, he says at the end in chapter 11, verse 32, and it's in your notes, I would take too long to recount the stories of faith of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, and the others. By faith, these people overthrew kingdoms. Well, Samson began to overthrow the kingdom. Samuel and Saul and David were going to continue it and finish it, but Samson got it going, which may not seem like much, but it's more than anybody else in Israel was doing at that time. Nobody else cared. They were just happy the way it was. Don't rock the boat. Samson at least began to overthrow the kingdom. He ruled with justice. One of the few times Samson shows restraint is when he is acting in his righteous indignation against the Philistines, and he could have obliterated thousands of them. But there's a part of the story he says, I've stopped now. That's it. It's over. I've done all I need to do. It's not unrestrained brutality. It's God's vengeance, which is, again, I understand, hard to grasp sometimes, but he did seek to rule with justice. How did Samson qualify? How did a guy who had more disobedience in his life than obedience qualify? Well, all these other characters are pretty flawed too. All the other characters in Hebrews chapter 11 are pretty flawed. It comes down to the grace of God, which sometimes the grace of God is pretty offensive to us and pretty scandalous to us in terms of how good God is to those of us who don't deserve it. But God was working to accomplish his purposes, and no one knew it. I'm going to ask the kids to come back to the front here for a minute and sit here. The raisin guys, you sit on this side of the stage, and the grape guys, you come and sit on this side of the stage. This past week, you saw some of the, if you were here early, you saw some of the things about Kids Camp. And this is one of the posters I pulled off one of the doors. It's a very interesting subtitle. I don't know if you read subtitles or secondary titles to books and so on. Journey off the map, unknown to us, but known to him. And in a lot of ways, that's sort of what Samson's story is about. It's unknown to Samson. It's unknown to his mom and dad. The Philistines thought they were winning. Instead, behind it all, God's at work, turning the tables, turning things around. And even with all this disobedience, even with, what kind of guy was Samson? If I had grapes and you like grapes, what kind of guy was Samson? If I have grapes and you like grapes, what kind of guy was Samson? What would you do? Attack! Yeah. If I had raisins and you loved raisins, and I'm walking along beside you, I didn't see you there, and I got raisins, you love raisins, what would you do, Memphis? You'd attack me if you were Samson, because I got what you want. His father didn't know what was going on with the birth announcement. In the first part of Samson's story, his dad's asking his mom, what happened? Who's the guy that came to visit you? Was it an angel? Was it God? Oh, no, it's God. We're going to die. The mom says, if it was God, we would have died a long time ago, because we've been having this conversation for a while. The dad wants to know. He doesn't know. And in the end, he still doesn't really find out what's going on with Samson. The riddles story. There's lots of riddles. Some of your book, in your packet, there's some riddles for you. You want to know I have a hard time with riddles. When I was in grade 9, I almost failed math because of word problems. Just about killed me. I didn't know, and I couldn't figure out the answer. And so there's an underground to this that you guys kind of had last week, unknown to us, but known to God. We like adventures when we know where we're going, but we don't like adventures if it's kind of a mystery and it's kind of unknown. And so in Romans chapter 11, I got the words there from Romans chapter 11 in your insert. Oh, how great are the riches and wisdom and knowledge of God. How impossible it is for us to understand his decisions and his ways. Who can know the Lord's thoughts? We just can't know what's going on in God. We can learn, we can seek to find out, we can seek more and more to know how God works and what's going on. And even in Samson, and there's some encouragement here to parents and grandparents as you pray for your kids and your grandkids, because this guy whose life was totally off the rails, God was at work. His final act, Josh, assume the position. Can you assume the position between the pillars there? Stand up, and just like Samson, there you go. Stand in the middle. There you go. That's it. So that's Samson's posture at the end of his life. Do you notice anything about Samson's posture as he's about to push the pillars and kill more Philistines in his death than he ever did in his life? Look back to the wall. It's the form of a cross. It's a cruciform sacrifice. It's interesting things in Samson. The birth announcement, just like in Luke chapter 1 and 2, the barren woman, Elizabeth, is going to give birth to the one who is going to prepare the way of the Lord. Mary is told what her son is going to do. Jesus is going to be Jesus of Nazareth. Sounds like Nazarite. There's a story, a little bit we know about Samson in chapter 13 that says he sort of grew and the Lord was with him and the Lord blessed him. That's almost like Luke describes Jesus in Luke chapter 2. And we get to the end of his life. And what's Samson doing? He's pointing us in 2015 to Jesus. Who would have thought that a cross where thieves are humiliated and scorned and mocked and abused would be something God would use to save the world? To save Israelites and Palestinians, North Americans. Who would have thought that something that every Israelite believed was being cursed by God would be the way God would save the world? I'm going to invite the worship team to come and lead us in our closing song. Thanks, kids, for your help. And if you want another box of raisins or thing of grapes, help yourself. Oh, I know something else I got for you as the worship team comes. I got another booklet for you to take with you. You guys can grab the booklets off that table over there. We're just finishing up 30 days of prayer, and there's lots of activities in here for kids and some good learning about places like Cairo and Egypt and Syria. And you can work on that at home with Mom and Dad and take some grapes with you. Thanks, guys.